Hi. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to try to talk about a lot tonight. So let me give you a preview. First of all, I'll say that about 150 years ago, the Metaphysical Society of Britain met and discussed the issue of whether God exists. And afterward, one of the members who hadn't been able to attend the meeting asked one of the other members, well, what happened? Does God exist or not? And the members said, yes, God exists, and we won by a very big majority. True story. Now, we know that truth is not so easily defined by voting or by anything other than scientific method, enlightenment, the analysis that developed in Talmudic, both the Greeks and in Talmudic analysis. And I often think now of what the great Zionist essayist Abbass wrote at the beginning of the previous century. He wrote, and my neighbor too, earlier time, just down the block in Tel Aviv, he said, how do we know that we are right and our enemies are wrong? And he was writing about the blood libel. And he said, because we know who we are, we know what we do. We know that it's not true. And this is a wisdom which, unfortunately, we need a great deal today. Today, the United Nations began discussing the Goldstone Report. I could actually spend the entire time talking about that. But let me briefly and accurately summarize the situation we find ourselves in. A radical Islamist, anti-Semitic group which seeks to carry out genocide, that is Hamas, seized control of the Gaza Strip by force, driving out opposition and repressing critical voices. There was no international intervention. Even though, by the way, no matter how supportive of the peace process you are, how much you want peace, you have to understand that the presence of Hamas governing almost half Palestinian ruled territory makes it absolutely impossible to achieve, aside from everything else, makes it absolutely impossible to achieve peace agreements. Then Hamas began firing rockets and mortar shells and staging cross-border attacks into Israel. There was no international reaction. There was a ceasefire. Hamas unilaterally tore up the ceasefire and began attacking Israel again to a large extent. There was no international reaction. At that point, Israel defended itself in the only way left to it. Hamas used civilians as human shields. It used mosques and schools and homes as firing positions. It had its military headquarters in a hospital. And there was no international reaction. But today, we have the attempt to indict Israel on phony charges of war crimes at the UN, where the resolution is being sponsored by the Palestinian Authority, which is supposedly Israel's peace partner. It's being presented to a General Assembly, which is chaired by Libya. It is being dealt with by a Human Rights Commission, most of which is controlled by Algeria and other dictatorships. And the largest voting bloc in the UN is led by Sudan, whose president is actually an indictment for genocide at the present time. No international reaction. This is the absurd position, and I could throw in more factors, we find ourselves in. And all I can say is that we have to approach it from our perspective, which goes back 4,000 years and stretches throughout the world. We've been through this kind of thing before. What I want to do this evening is to cover several topics. First, I want to discuss very briefly why the Middle East is such a mess. Notice I said very briefly. Then I want to talk about the most important issue in the Middle East, which is the struggle between Islamists and nationalists. Then I want to talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict. And in the context of those 3 points, I'll talk about Israel's strategy and Israel-U.S. relations. First, why is the Middle East in such a mess? The problem is not an external one, it's an internal one. Usually, when the system doesn't work, when a government or regime doesn't govern, it doesn't bring peace to its people. It doesn't raise its people's living standards. It doesn't give its people more freedom. It's corrupt and incompetent. Usually, that regime tends to fall. But the fact is that virtually every state in the Middle East, every Arabic-speaking state in the Middle East, plus Iran, is ruled by the dictatorships which are largely incompetent. By the way, if I were academic, I would put in the little footnotes like Lebanon is a separate case, and we have to talk about these. But I'm just going to try to keep it very brief. But those regimes don't fall because we think of the Middle East as very unstable, but in fact it's quite stable. Every government basically in the Arabic-speaking world is the same government that existed going back to about 1974, and in some ways you can go further back. Why don't those systems change? Why don't those governments change? In some cases they're the same people, or their sons. One case daughter, too. But generally sons. Because they have worked out a formula for staying in power. And that formula includes stirring up anti-Americanism, anti-Westernism, anti-Israelism. Everything is the fault of the West. Everything is the fault of Israel. These are our enemies. There's an Arab proverb that goes, "No voice can rise above the din of battle." Or in American World War II slang, don't you know, there's a war on. You can't demand democracy, you can't demand reform, you can't demand change, you can't demand more freedom, you can't demand a more open economy, because real enemy, America, the West, Israel, has to be defeated first. And that system, and I've written a book about it called Modern Dictators, I've written a lot about it, that system is the center of the problem. Because if you need conflict, if you need Israel as an enemy, if you need the West as an enemy, if you want to maintain that system of dictatorship, then you're not going to have infinite flexibility. And so if someone says, well, there's no difference between America and Egypt or Syria or Jordan or Iraq, because we all want the same thing, the answer is that the system and worldview, which has been conditioned by that system, pushes people in very different directions for very different needs. That's a very brief presentation. I want to introduce that notion to you. Point number 2. What is the central issue in the Middle East? Now, in theory, the central issue in the Middle East should be between dictatorship and democracy, between Arab nationalism and I use the word in the broadest sense, liberalism. But that's not true, unfortunately. Liberal, pro-democratic forces in the region are extremely weak for a whole variety of historical and structural factors. They don't have a chance, basically. The real battle is between the nationalists and the Islamists. In general, between the existing regimes and the radical Islamist oppositions. Now, neither of these two sides are retreat. Neither of these two sides are wonderful. Neither of these two sides are chovei b'tzion. Okay? But we have to think strategically how to deal with this central issue. The central issue in the Middle East is not the Arab-Israeli conflict. And one of the reasons, even though people often talk that way, because it's useful for them to talk that way, but in fact, to a large extent, the Arab states in general have given up the active pursuit as a high priority of the conflict because they lost the wars. So it's increasingly a verbal conflict. It's to some extent giving money conflict, but it's not important for them. They put it on the back burner. Let me give an example of how this interaction between the systemic problem of the Arab-Israeli conflict works. Many people believe that Syria is ready to make peace with Israel. What sounds logical is, if Israel returns the Golan Heights to Syria, Syria will make peace. And you can give a list of all the reasons, if you only think in Western terms, you can give a list of all the reasons why they would want to make peace with Israel. Number one, they have peace. Peace is good. People want peace. Number two, they get the Golan Heights back, so therefore they can say, look, we're a big success, we got the Golan Heights back. Number three, they can have an economic opening with the West, they can attract investment, living standards will go up, so it's all good. So for somebody who basically doesn't know anything about the Middle East, even if they're a professor of Middle East Studies at a major American university, which is not an uncommon occurrence, they would say it's perfectly logical. But if you actually know something about Syrian Arab politics and society, it's not possible. So let me give you this as a case study about how we have to think differently about the Middle East. And the easiest way to do that is, and I find this is often useful, to set up the opposite situation. Let's assume that Syria and Israel made peace next week. What would happen? For a week or two, there would be celebrations. You got to go on back. But then the problems would begin. And I could go and list 15 or 20 of these, but let me be brief. Number one, okay, war's over. So where's our peace dividend? Why aren't living standards going to go up? Number two, democracy. Okay, we had essentially a military dictatorship because it was a war on. Now there's not a war on, so where is freedom? Number three, the Western investment. Well, the whole point is the government controls the economy and uses the income to reward friends and punish enemies. They don't care if living standards don't go up. They don't care if the economy does well, because for them, as in the Soviet Union, the purpose of the economy is to keep the regime in power. So Western investment is bad because you have to open up the country. The government has to give up control over all sectors of the economy. By the way, one of the things you often find about liberals in the Arab world is they're people who have connections with Western companies. So, for example, the most vocal liberal dissident in Syria, his family had the franchise for various clothing things, including for Adidas sports shoes. So they have an independent base. And you, the government of Syria, don't want people to have an independent base. If the economy doesn't go as well, you'll accept that. Who will get money? Who is good at business? If there's an opening, the Sunni Arabs will get it. The Alawites, a different group, tend to run Syria. Are you going to cut the military budget because the war is over? Then how are you going to keep the generals happy so they don't make a coup? So what you get is, on the one hand, from one direction, the government of Syria, if it made peace with Israel, would hear, we want democracy, we want human rights, we want equality for women, we want higher living standards, why can't you give it to us? And on the other side, they would hear, you people are a bunch of traitors because you told us for 50 years that you would never make peace with the Zionist enemy and you sold out. And besides, what if you have a normal Middle East? Syria and Israel have different interests. Syria wants to dominate the Palestinians, dominate Jordan, dominate Lebanon, and Israel wants to prevent that out of national interest. So what I'm saying is, the minute you get beyond the most superficial analysis, you see that the region looks very different from what it does if you just assume that it's just like America. Now, I was going to say, if you assume the politics in the Middle East is just like the politics of the state of Massachusetts, but then I realized that would be a mistake because perhaps there would be too much in common. Let me apply that analysis now to the Arab-Israeli conflict, or the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Because a lot of the Arab-Israeli conflict, as we've known it, is over in the sense that it was the 60s, 70s, 80s, very active military. But okay. Logically, by the way, I think this is really the number one reason for people being hostile to Israel, aside from the leftist ideology and anti-Semitic thing, is that they don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to them. Okay, you have Palestinians. Remember, the President of the United States said Palestinians have an intolerable situation. It's horrible. They want to stay as quickly as possible. That sounds logical, doesn't it? But the problem is, it's the opposite prevails. It's very different from what average American would expect. That, in fact, because the Palestinian side, the leadership, both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority in different ways, want total victory. Their position is, we're willing to wait as long as possible, we want everything. Now, honestly, I'm short on time here. I've spent 30 years analyzing Palestinian politics. Believe me, I can go into detail. I can point to exceptions and different views. But I have to be brief here. Basically, the Palestinian movement has not even begun the process of dealing with Israel with some sense of empathy, moderation, compromise, preparing its people for a compromise solution in which they would get an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip and its capital in East Jerusalem, and that's the end of the conflict, and they settle all the Palestinians in Palestine, and that's it. And everybody lives happily ever after. This is not what their mosque sermons say, it's not what their schools say, it's not what their TV and radio says. What the expectations in the United States of Palestinian politics and internal Palestinian dialogue have nothing to do with reality. And it's easy to demonstrate that. But people don't want to pay attention. For example, I pointed out that the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbass, is getting up there in years. He has some health problems. So the end of his career is in sight. He needs to think about a successor. So who does he pick as a successor from all the people he can pick? And there are different viewpoints. He picks Mohammed Ghanim. Who's Mohammed Ghanim? Mohammed Ghanim is literally the hardest line Palestinian there is in Fatah. He is somebody who rejected the Oslo Agreement of 1993. He said that Yasser Arafat went too far and sold out, and therefore he wouldn't support him. He is now number 2 man in the Palestinian Authority, the designated successor of Mahmoud Abbas. I didn't pick him. And by the way, if you want, I'll talk about more detail why he picked him. Mahmoud Abbas. So if you pick a guy who is so hardline that he wouldn't even accept the Oslo Agreement, is this the guy who's going to make peace? Is this a step toward making peace? And for example, we saw and I could give hundreds of examples. President Barack Obama, who has done a certain amount for Palestinians, who has distanced himself a certain amount from Israel, said, look, we're giving you all this money, we're giving you all this support, so we're going to ask you for a little favor. Don't push the Goldstone Resolution at the UN. You know all the Arab states and Islamic states, they're going to do it. You don't have to be the main sponsor. So Abbas said, okay, for about 48 or 72 hours. And then he was pressured, no, we must be at the forefront of saying that Israel is guilty of war crimes, and there should be sanctions and pressures, and it should be cast into the outer darkness. So he turned around and accepted it. And now Fatah has a paper of October 12th saying Barack Obama is a big disappointment, he didn't do anything for us, he's our enemy, he's just like everybody else. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel says, we're ready to negotiate. Mahmoud Abbas says, no, I won't negotiate unless there's a total freeze and destruction on all settlements, nothing short of that. So here's Barack Obama. He announces at the UN, we are about to start serious final negotiations very intensely. And Mahmoud Abbas says, no, I won't talk to the Israelis. This is the kind of, Abba Eban, Israel's foreign minister, famously said that the Palestinians never miss a chance to miss an opportunity. But it's important to explain why that is. And the reason that is that the goal of total victory overwhelms the idea of compromise solution, which will get them to stay in the conflict and in what people call the occupation. Now, I'm not standing up here saying this because I want to say this, because I don't want peace. I mean, this is what I see, and I think what Israelis see. And we don't have the margin where we can ignore what we see and live on wishful thinking. We have to deal with the reality. There is no chance of Israeli-Palestinian peace for decades. And it's not even clear that we're moving in the right direction. And Israelis overwhelmingly understand that, whether they like it or not. This has nothing to do with ideology. You could say people on the right like it, people don't like it. But the point is they understand it. But let me just finish up on this point. So, we held an experiment called the Peace Process, or the Oslo Accord. We spent 8 years working on this, between 1992, 93 signed, to 2000. And the experiment was the following basis. We will test it out and see if the Palestinian side, and Syria also, by the way, are ready to make peace. We will test out the proposition that they have not been offered enough, because we'll offer them pretty much everything that they said they wanted, and we will try to do this. Now, I don't want to take too much time, but I should tell a true story at this point that symbolizes this. And I checked this out completely. I interviewed the people involved. So picture the day in 1994 when the Oslo Agreement started to be implemented, and Yasser Arafat came from Egypt in a cavalcade of limousines to Gaza City to begin the Palestinian Authority. And Prime Minister Yitzhak Rubin was watching this on television. His phone rang, and it was the head of intelligence. And I interviewed him. I checked this out. Rubin says, I can't come to the phone, I'm watching Arafat. And they said, no, he says, you must come to the phone, it's so important. So Rubin says, okay, what is it, what's so important? And the head of intelligence of Shabak said, you know those 4 people who we said we would not admit under any circumstances? And Rubin said, yes. He said, well, Arafat just smuggled them in his limousine and the other cars. Now let me take a step back. Israel, and by the way, people are not aware that during the peace process period, 200,000 Palestinians came into the West Bank and Gaza Strip with Israel's permission. But when they were negotiating, Israel said, we don't want people to come back who've been directly involved in acts of terrorism which Israelis can kill. So they started out, the intelligence people produced a list of 120 Palestinians who wouldn't be allowed in. 200,000 could come in, 120 couldn't. Arafat said, well, you need to prove that you're really for peace. Can't you do better than that? So then they got it down to 30 or 40. And then Arafat said, well, can you prove to me that you really want peace? Can't you do better than that? So finally, they got it down to 4 people. And if you read my biography of Arafat, you see the details on what these people did. It was pretty horrendous. Arafat then smuggled those 4 people. You can bring 200,000 people back, but not those 4. Smuggled them in. So Rubin said, and a few days later, to Arafat, look, as long as those people are in Gaza, no negotiations, absolutely frozen. Arafat said, what people? They're not here. Rubin said, look, we know intelligence are there. I want them out. So they sent them to Egypt, and then a while later they snuck back in. If you understand this story, you understand the kinds of things that Israel dealt with during the peace process experiment. Now, Israel was very deeply divided, so divided, of course, that Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, and I was there about distance from that corner to the exit sign that night, November 4th, 1995. And Israel was divided. There were 2 views. One view said, we believe that Yasser Arafat will make a deal and keep it. And people on the right said, we believe that Yasser Arafat will make a deal and break it, because he's going to turn down a state. And of course, in the end, both sides proved mistaken. Yasser Arafat rejected a deal, both at Camp David and in December of 2000 offered by President Bill Clinton, when he was offered an independent Palestinian state and all the Gaza Strip and almost all the West Bank, with a large part of East Jerusalem, and the opening financial offer, not from Israel but from the U.S., was $22 billion. Rejected. Instead went to an intifada, and between 2000 and 2005, about 3,500 to 4,000 people were killed. The Israelis learned a lesson from that. They learned the lesson that peace isn't so easy. We don't really have a partner for peace. That, yes, they really do want everything. And this is the problem that we face. I think people in the U.S. and Europe did not understand that lesson. They never really discussed why did Oslo. They said, well, if Israel didn't offer them enough. Bill Clinton knows better, because he was there. But this shaped the Israeli psyche. And since 2000, the mainstream view in Israel has been, we really do not have a peace option for comprehensive peace. I can tell you a lot of anecdotes One of my friends, I never discussed politics with him, but he was a kibbutznik. So I said, after knowing this guy like 3 or 4 years, I said, who do you vote for? He said, I vote for the Communist Party. I said, really? He's a solid middle-class real estate guy. I said, well, who are you voting for this time? He said, Ariel Sharon is the only person who should be prime minister. And you see, my friends who voted for Meretz, who voted for Sharon, or at least, understood a different viewpoint. And Israel is still shaped by that viewpoint. Now, in the context of this, what is the current policy of Israel? And it basically, and I think this is a consensus position, it goes like this. Real comprehensive peace is out of reach. We are living in a long interim period. We have to figure out how to make this interim period go as best as we can. So what do we need to do? Well, number one, we have to work with the Palestinian Authority as much as possible because we don't want Hamas to take over the West Bank. We want Palestinian living standards to go up. We want to either encourage or do it ourselves to stop cross-border attacks against Israel. So we have to do a makeshift kind of thing and do the best we can. With Hamas, we have to show them that they can't get away with waging a war at no cost. And in fact, the campaign in Gaza was a big success because you see, they're not firing mortars and rockets and doing cross-border attacks anymore, or very often anymore. Why? Because the basic way that international affairs works, even if people in the West don't understand it anymore, is that you show them, unfortunately, you had to show them that you can inflict enough cost that they don't want to do this. Now, of course, with Hamas, because of their ideology, they'll be back in 2 or 3 years doing it again. We'll have to deal with that. The basic position of Israel, however, strategically, is actually pretty good right now. It's the best that's ever been in the history of Israel. Because in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, Israel was much weaker and faced the possibility of going to war with all Arab states, conventional armies, on any given day. I'll trade that with the threat of rockets from Hamas or Hezbollah any day of the week. And Israel is a strong economy, morale is high, the country is more united. So it's more able to defend itself. And people have basically shared view. We want peace. We're ready to have an independent Palestinian state. We're ready to give up, and here you have some variation, the all of Gaza, 97% of the West Bank, 96% with territorial swaps, or more. Jerusalem, at least Jerusalem is a very tough topic. But still, basically, the Israeli position, or one majority, is if we believe we can have real, and this is an idea taken from the left, if we believe we can have real peace, then we are ready to give up a lot. But, and this is taken from the right, we're not going to be easy to fool at this time. We're not going to make the same mistake, and we're going to we're very skeptical. And most people can agree on those propositions. Now, how does Israel deal with the U.S. in this regard? Well, I think with incredible success. The fact is that objectively and materially, U.S.-Israel relations are quite good at present. It didn't have to turn out that way. There are a number of factors that made it that way, and if you ask me, I'll talk about them. But basically, U.S. has backed off the demand for a freeze on all settlement construction immediately. They maybe learned some lessons. I'll come to that in a second. Because sometimes our best friends are enemies. Because they're so extreme, they're so demanding, they give so little, that they force lessons onto the outsiders. And the Obama administration must have been paying, and has been paying, some attention. What happened? First, they asked Arab states, can you make some gestures toward Israel to give a basis for this demand of the settlement, freeze and construction settlements. And they said, no, we won't do it. But I'm so popular, you love me, look at my Cairo speech. No, we won't do it. Basically, and I'm not exaggerating, what they got out of it is, A, offers by, Qatar and Oman to reopen the Israeli trade offices, which are open anyway. So one Israeli trade official can come. They won't send anybody to Israel. And number two, they got an op-ed piece in the Washington Post by a member of the ruling family of the United Arab Emirates, which, if you read it closely, basically says, we haven't done a good enough job of propagandizing Israel's point of view. That was portrayed as a dovish statement. That's it. So they dissed him, or threw a pie in his face on that one. Then, as I said, the PA, Palestinian Authority, refuses to talk to Israel. The Palestinian Authority refuses to back down Goldstone, being the main sponsor pushing the Goldstone report. And I left out something else that's happened in the last week that I'll probably remember in a moment. And now they're starting to say, oh, we don't like Obama. Obama's our enemy because he actually offered us a lot, but he actually asked us to do something. Well, that's not acceptable. You have to offer us everything and ask from us nothing. And when Mahmoud Abbass came to Washington to meet President Obama for the first time, he said in his interview, quoting the Washington Post, our policy is not to do anything because we'll just wait and then the West will deliver Israel to us to give us what we want. I can give you the reference on that if you want. So this is not being helpful. This is not being helpful. And this is the lesson that the Obama administration is getting on the Arab-Israeli issue. So I think they've learned some things. They've learned they're not going to settle this in a few months, and that maybe the Palestinians aren't so desperate for an agreement. And consequently, a lot of the early storms and rhetoric either has cooled off or has not led to any material development. And I'll tell you, personally, saying that, I know what people say in Israeli government, political life, institutions, people who work on this in Washington, and they're pretty satisfied with a direct relationship. There are problems, of course, over Iran and some other issues, but a direct relationship is pretty good. So we come to the problem of Iran. I just want to address for a couple of minutes before I finish. As you all know, Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons and genocidal threats against Israel are very serious matter. But what I always say to people is, as serious as the Israel aspect is, we know about that. People can decide in America, Europe, and elsewhere whether or not the possibility of Iran using nuclear weapons against Israel bothers them or not. Maybe it doesn't. So let's look at self-interest. If Iran gets nuclear weapons, Israel can still defend itself. Israel has the option of attacking Iran. Israel is developing anti-missile systems. So Israel can defend itself, but the Arab states can't defend themselves. So the first thing you'll see, if Iran gets nuclear weapons, is Arab governments are going to ask themselves, let's see now, Iran is threatening me. Am I going to depend on Barack Obama protecting me? Do I believe he will go to war? Do I believe he will threaten? Do I believe I can put my faith in him? Well, better not take any chances. Arab states will appease Iran. And what does Iran want from them? Number one, don't make peace with Israel. So if Iran gets nuclear weapons, if you believe there's a possibility of peace, then you can forget there's any possibility of peace. Number two, they don't want American forces in the region. So they'll say, don't give the U.S. bases, don't cooperate with the U.S. So there will be a lot more Arab appeasement of Iran and unwillingness, not that there isn't enough now, to oppose Iranian ambitions. The effect on Europe, again, there's enough willingness to appease Iran now. What would they be like if Iran has nuclear weapons? Will the U.S. or Europe mount any operation in the Middle East? Will they energetically oppose Iranian ambitions in Iraq? Or at least southwestern Afghanistan? Or Lebanon? No. Number three, the price of oil will zoom upward for two reasons. First of all, because people will be afraid of the crisis with Iran having nuclear weapons. And second of all, Iran wants the price to go up. So is Saudi Arabia going to say no if Iran has nuclear weapons and wants them to raise the price? they'll do it. And finally, my personal favorite, and you have to understand how Middle East politics works. If Iran has a nuclear weapon, millions of Muslims, mainly in the Middle East, will say they did it, they showed the West, they're a success, they're powerful, they must be doing something right. We're going to go down to the local recruiting station and sign up for a revolutionary Islamist group. Some of these groups may be anti-Iranian, but it will be Islamism works. And I guarantee you that the level of crisis and violence will go up in every Arabic-speaking state and in Europe as well, as tens and hundreds of thousands of people join radical Islamist groups. So I would say to people, even if you couldn't care less about Israel getting wiped off the face of the map, you better worry about your own interests if Iran gets nuclear weapons. Now, what do I think is likely to happen? At some point, when they get tired of Iran pretending to negotiate, let's say February, March, or April of next year, then the U.S. will go for higher sanctions. The Russians and the Chinese won't go along with it. They'll sabotage it. If you want, I'll tell you in detail how they'll do it. And there'll be a period of time. And then at some point, maybe when we get into 2011, Iran is getting closer, the sanctions aren't working, there'll have to be an Israeli cabinet meeting to decide what to do. Nobody knows what will happen. And I can talk about the military option in some detail, though there's some stuff I won't talk about if you like. That's basically, I think, how it sort of looks going into the future. Now, people tend to think of me as being very pessimistic. But I'm not. I don't feel pessimistic, because I'm actually what we call a Middle East optimist. You know, that in the United States, the ultimate crime is not to be an optimist, and not to believe everything's going to be fine really soon and really completely and totally. A Middle Eastern optimist means everything will be basically okay. I think that Israel will win. I think that the Islamists will lose. If you want, I'll give you a list of reasons why. The problem with these things in history is it's a question of how long it takes and how many people suffer as a result. So I have no doubt that we'll win. I think Israel's actually doing very well. But overall, the picture in the region is very grim. And believe me, I have a lot of friends in Egypt and Lebanon and people I talk to every day or every couple of days. Not to mention the people in Central Europe who are worried about Putin and Russia. We're a lot more optimistic than they are because we can defend ourselves, which after all was the original idea of Israel. Israel is not only good at weapons, but in high tech and in all sorts of things which make the country grow and develop. One of the fallacies is if you devote all your effort to destruction, you're only going to end up with destruction. And if you devote a lot of your efforts to creativity and progress, then you'll have creativity and progress. So I do not feel pessimistic. Let me end there, and thank you for your time and attention. But I'll just say, if you are interested, I'd be happy to give you, I'll take your cards afterward. If you'd like to subscribe to our publications, to my blog, Rubin Reports on Blogspot, which has a lot of good articles that go into great detail on what we've talked about today. And thank you very much.